Good morning, class. Today I'm going to show you the step-by-step process that I use when trying to develop an algorithm and then the program that goes along with that algorithm. So first of all, let's take a look at the steps that I use and the tools that I use to kind of finish that step. So step number one is understand the problem. And what we're talking about here is for every algorithm, for every program, for every task that we want our computer to complete, we've got to understand exactly what that problem is. What is the task at hand? And the tool that I use to get through this phase of the software development process is asking questions. And you're probably thinking, okay, I'm brand new to this. How in the world do I know what questions to ask? Well, that's simple. The questions that we ask are always going to be related to what are my outputs? Remember when we talked about how a computer processes information, there's only four things that it can do. It can do input, it can do process, it can do output, and it can do storage. So our outputs are what are the things that we want, what are the items, what are the pieces of data that we want to turn into information and display on the screen. And one of the things that we'll learn for every output that we have to develop, there is a process that goes to that output that's made up of the inputs from the computer. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this problem statement and we're going to determine what are the pieces in the process that we need to turn from data into information to then turn into outputs. All right, so let's take a look at our problem statement. Our problem statement we're going to do straight from the book, and it is at the end of chapter 2. It's the programming exercises, and I'm going to start with problem number 2 because in class we've already done problem number 1 and we stepped through that process. So here is our problem statement. You can calculate the surface area of a cube if you know the length of the edge. Write a program that takes the length of an edge as an integer as input and then print the cube surface area as output. So we've got our problem statement, and what we want to do is we want to look for keywords in this problem statement, particularly anything that we need to produce as outputs. All right, so what we're looking here are things for output. So we're going to write a program that takes the length of an edge as input and prints the cube's surface area as the output. So we know right away that we're going to output the surface area. And that's the only output that we need to produce for this problem statement. So now we're ready to go through phase 2 and start envisioning our objects. And when we're envisioning our objects, let's go back over here. When we envision our objects, what that means is what are all of the variables that I'm going to use in this problem statement? What are my inputs? What are the math processes that I've got to produce, or the decisions that I've got to produce or process to then develop that output? The tool that we use is known as an IPO chart, an input process output chart. And we're going to step through the process of creating one of those IPO charts as it is one of the first pieces of documentation, external documentation, that we as developers, programmers, need to produce. So with that being said, we always start this process with a folder, and I'm going to call this the program folder. The program folder is the name of the folder that you're going to create that's going to store all of the documentation for this program as well as the program itself. Okay, so I'm going to create a new folder here on my desktop, and I'm going to name it based on what this program is going to be. And we are producing the surface area of a cube. So I'm just going to keep it simple, and I'm going to call this program folder cube. C-U-B-E. Now, IPO charts. The tool that we use is an IPO chart. Now, to build an IPO chart, I go back and I use what is known as Excel, because Excel is a pretty cool tool when you see how we build this IPO chart. So I'm going to open up a brand new Excel file, and then I'm going to start simple IPO chart. It has inputs column, it has a process column, and it has a output column. All right, again, I always start with my outputs, and the output that I'm going to create is the surface area of this cube. Now, naming our objects, this is where those camel case rules come into play. So I'm going to name the variable that's going to hold the surface area that I'm then going to output as my program. So I'm going to name this variable surface area. And notice I'm using those camel case rules. Next, what is the process to get to this surface area? What are the pieces and the parts of the data that I need to create the math process to output this surface area? Well, to calculate the surface area, I need to take what the user is going to input as the edge, multiply it by itself, and then multiply it by 6, because working with a cube has 6 areas. So what we're going to do is we're going to request from the user to input the edge of the cube. Now, to get surface area, I'm going to take the edge times the edge times 6 to get the surface area. And let's go ahead and this is a very simple IPO chart. Very simple IPO chart. Now, as a part of the documentation rules, I'm going to name this document the same as the program folder and put it in that program folder. So I'm going to do a file, save as. I'm going to go to my desktop and find where I have that program folder. I'm going to make sure it's in that program folder, and then I'm going to name it, not book 1, I'm going to name it Cube IPO to represent that it's the piece of the documentation called the IPO charts. And that is our IPO charts.